So I've promised you a story, cold as hell. The story of a man named Edward Teach. So with no further ado, I'll give it to you in as much detail as I know it. Goes like this. Back then, the British were fighting piracy pretty hard. In fact, they were pretty much at war with everybody, at various times with the Dutch, with the French, with everybody, the Spanish. Only the problem is, especially with the Dutch and the French, there was a time period of several years where they were declaring peace and war back and forth on an almost monthly basis. Literally, every 6 months, if you didn't know who your enemies were, and you were, say, a military captain, you might come across a problem, like Blackbeard did. A story right from hell, his tale of woe. I now tell. So this man, a military man, a naval man, volunteers his ship and his crew, his own. See, he designed it and built it from scratch. Many did the same. My family member, Robinsons, they were shipbuilders of the day. Dutch, in fact, and did the same. Had 3 great ships that were famous. They were pirate hunting with those ships. So Blackbeard, he leaves his port with orders from the British Crown, letters of marque, to go and hunt pirates. At the time, they were at war with the French, the Dutch, and the Spanish. Legally entitling him to take any one of those ships were his letters of marque that said, hey, you can kill them, and it's a favor to the British Crown, and it'll pay. Well, he's got a whole crew that depend on him. And as a good captain, which he was, he had no choice but to make war. Because once they set sail, turning back and doing anything else would have been called cowardice. They couldn't stop and turn around and come back just to check every 6 months. The journey took a year. And by the time they got there, and he started to hunt pirates, which he was hired to do, he took a ship. A Dutch ship. The only problem was 6 months before that, there had been a peace declaration between Britain and the Dutch. You can look it up. And the next thing you know, this poor bastard, in his tale of woe, had captured an illegal vessel, but not knowing it, he had led all of his men to commit piracy, earning every one of them the death sentence, were they to go back. But like I said, he didn't know. This is a tale from hell and of woe, as I promised. It's his life story, it's not mine. I'm not divine. I don't know this through the divine providence. No, I know it because I read it. I know it because it's a known tale. All of the things I'm about to tell you are documented in history. And so, I'll just get to it. So he takes this ship, and he brings it to the closest friendly port. And when he does this, some months have already gone by since he took the vessel. He can't very well give it back or unkill the crew they killed in capturing the vessel. The deed is done. They pull into this port, and it is then told to him that he's committed an act of piracy, that 6 months have gone by since peace was declared, and this man has murdered and pillaged this ship unlawfully. This actually happened to quite a few people back in the day. Quite a few of them suffered the same fate. A lot of military men who were good men suddenly ended up pirates. And the reason they did was the same. They didn't have communication then. There wasn't any cell phones. They had no choice. They just went forward with the orders they had. It took them as long as it took to get to this goal. And when they did, they took a ship. It was an enemy ship as far as they knew at the time. But unbeknownst to them, they weren't divine any more than I am, or you are. And they didn't know that the rules had changed of war. And suddenly, they were pirates now. Well, during their stop at this port, Blackbeard had heard this, and he couldn't believe that these people would charge him with piracy. But he didn't want to take the chance of finding out the hard way when they sailed into a British port with their new prize, and were all promptly hung for treason. But the ship needed repairs, the crew needed to rest, and time to reprovision. They'd been out for quite a while, well over a year. And so they sent themselves a letter off to the British Admiralty to find out if what they'd heard was true. They gave it to a nearby ship who was in port when they docked. Blackbeard wrote the letter as soon as he saw what was going on. Immediately, because he's a good man, a good captain. And immediately, it was dispatched with this ship, which was leaving in a few hours after it was handed over to the captain. It reached Britain long before he did, or would have. And luckily for him, the ship needed a lot more repairs than he thought, because his original plan was to make it directly for Britain and throw himself on the mercy of the crown, believing in his heart that they would do nothing of the sort. They wouldn't execute him, a good man, a good crew, for doing good work. By order of the crown? Surely not. And yet, while they were still working on the vessel, the return letter came. It turned out it was exactly true. They absolutely were going to hang every one of them. And they had been labeled pirates. Like I said, it's a tale of woe. Well, this good man, now faced with a devil's choice. What was he supposed to do? He had a whole bunch of men with him that he was committed to feeding and caring for and keeping from the gallows, because he personally had led them there. On his word, they went forward. On his word, they killed. And he had killed them all. And he knew it. And so what he did was a good thing. An act of a brave man trying to save himself and his crew. You might think. But really his thoughts, from what I saw in his diary, weren't from him. They weren't for him. They had revolved around his crew and around the many dozens of men that he now had sworn to protect and to keep and to guide. That's what a captain does. Your life is in his hands. His decisions can kill you. And you have to trust in him. And those men trusted in him. And he led them into hell. Every one of them. It's one of the reasons he dressed himself up like a demon. He really believed he might be. It almost drove him insane, the things he had done. The guilt of all these men being hanged over him and with him. And even if they escaped and went and told their story to the crown, killed him and returned, they'd have been hung just the same. The British really didn't have any soul at all at that day and age. It was all politics, though. You can't really blame them. They had just made peace with an enemy they had had a vicious war with. And 6 months later, you start attacking their ships. They're likely to be quite upset. And justice will be demanded. Otherwise, the war will start again, and more people will die. So the British were just choosing the lesser of two evils. Well, so was Blackbeard, as far as he was concerned. Because what he did next wasn't really shocking, if you think about it. What he did next was take another ship. Because he had to feed his men. They needed provisions. And since they weren't going to be paid for their ship, they really had no money. There wasn't much money on board. In fact, the value was in the ship itself. When you take a prize ship in war, you're entitled to a percentage of the value of the vessel. That's how they used to pay you. And it was a beautiful ship. The men were expecting to be paid a year's worth of pay all at once, which for them was like being wealthy. Most money they'd ever see in their lives, all at once, in one place, at one time. Every sailor's dream at the time. It's what most of them went to war for, the hope of taking such prizes. Only instead of getting paid for it, they found out they would be paid with hanging. No silver would come to them, no gold, just death and the loss of their soul. So these men turned to piracy, and they began to hunt. Not because they wanted to. In fact, at first, his takes were fairly rare. Only as often as he absolutely had to allow his men to survive. In the upcoming video series, I'll talk to you a lot about this man's life, about his tale of woe and hell. And I promise you it will be a spooky one. There will be parts of it you won't believe, but every word is true. So stay tuned, like, subscribe, click the bell, and you'll see this is a story from hell. Keith out.